now, just to make sure that we have that. Um, Okay, so I think I've gone all over the house rules. I do ask that you mute yourself, other than the speakers, please don't. Um, please mute yourself. If you choose to leave your video on or off, that's totally up to you. And again, fill out our poll to help us plan more programs in the future and utilize the chat for asking any questions that come to mind. Okay, it's 7:30. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to have Michelle um, start sharing hers.
Right. Can you all see that?
You want to put it into, yep, slideshow view. Yes, it looks wonderful. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
All right, well, we'll begin. And again, I'll be monitoring the chat. So thanks for putting your questions in there. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Sarah, I just realized I lost everybody's visuals. So I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second, see if I
Okay.
can get those back. Okay. Because I don't want to I don't want to lose all of that. I'm just going to minimize them.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen yet?
No, not me.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to reshare it. Okay. We back?
Yes, we are. You want to just go into slideshow view and you'll be set.
All right. All right. Well, I'll
Perfect.
introduce myself first. My name is Michelle Bartel. I am, as Sarah mentioned, we're all master gardeners. I have been herb gardening for a long time. I'm a dietitian by training, so I love to use fresh herbs, and it's something that I've been gardening with in containers um, for many years. So that's kind of my interest is as using them a lot in culinary uses.
Hi, I'm Sue Craw, and I also have been using herbs quite a bit. Right now, I'm experimenting with overwintering herbs and um, also keeping them outside, putting in the warm weather, keeping them in my kitchen, and just that's what gardening is also all about, is experimenting. So I love herbs and like to use them mostly in culinary also.
And I'm Erica Pfeiffer, and I've been gardening for many, many moons. I also work at a garden center as a part of my retirement. So that's been a lot of fun, but I use a lot of herbs in cooking. I also am experimenting a little bit this winter with a couple of herbs that I'm using grow lights for because I have a very shady house. So on that note, I'll turn it back to Michelle.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just to start us off, talk a little bit about what Sarah mentioned, what we are going to talk about tonight in the presentation. And then, of course, if you have any questions, we will save some time at the end to hopefully have time to answer all your questions. We'll talk a little bit about our herb identification, why grow your own herbs, what are some of the benefits of growing your own herbs, how do you go about selecting the herbs that you want to grow? I call them rules of thumb or steps for getting started. Herbs are they're pretty easy to grow as long as you follow a few general rules of thumb. We'll go over a little bit about harvesting, how to take care of your herbs and when to harvest and how to harvest, and finish up with some culinary uses. We'll also review how to build your own container herb garden. So in May, we are looking to do an in-person class on this where we will build your own container herb garden. Tonight we'll just,
I'll take it home.
yeah, and you would be able to take that with you. So tonight we'll kind of give you an overview of what that will look like. And then we could talk about some recipe ideas. We'd love to hear your ideas as well of how you use herbs or ways that you like to incorporate them into recipes. And then we'll share some of our ideas with you. I put in this slide here some herbs that you might recognize. These are some fairly common herbs and pretty easy to grow. And these are ones that we'll talk about. Sue's going to talk a little bit more about selecting herbs. But what you see in this picture are some of the most common and easy to grow herbs. Back here is rosemary, thyme. There are a couple different types of sage, parsley, and basil. So these we'll distinguish between which ones are annuals, which ones are perennials, the different watering needs. They are not all the same, but these are a good selection of common starters if you're looking to start an herb garden. They're also really have many uses in cooking. So they have lots of ways you can use them in cooking. Why grow your own herbs? Biggest reason is flavor. Fresh herbs are going to perk up any dish. Putting fresh herbs on a dish adds color, it adds flavor, it actually adds some nutrition. If you're not aware, the herbs, especially things like parsley, are very nutrient dense. They have as much nutrition as other leafy greens, vitamins and minerals. So they add flavor, they add color, they add aroma, and they add some nutrition. And they really elevate any dish. So I think you could take, a jar of canned sauce and mix it with pasta and add some fresh herbs, and it will elevate your dish. They're convenient. My herb garden is right off my kitchen and a back deck, so it's very convenient to go and snip herbs that I need when I'm cooking, and they don't go to waste. I use them as I need them, and they're right there at my fingertips. Cost, clearly they're going to be less or more reasonably priced than what you're going to find in the grocery store. So you can also get a lot of yield for your initial investment. So, you plant a few small herbs and, you care for them, you're going to get an abundance of them. Some of them you may have way more than you know what to do with. So you can look then at preserving them, harvesting them, freezing and drying them so you can use them all winter long. And as I mentioned before, herbs are really easy to grow. So it's a great way if you're a beginner gardener, it's a great way to start. And they're not fussy. They don't require a ton of attention, just a little bit of, paying attention to the sunlight and the watering, and you can be pretty successful with herb growing. Did you want to add anything to any
Nope,
of
that was
those?
it.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who's going to talk a little bit about how to go about selecting herbs for an herb garden.
So when you're trying to decide which herbs you'd like to grow, maybe the first step would be to look into your spice rack and see which herbs are in there and the ones that you use the most there. You The other thing that you want to, so again, the easy, as Michelle has stated, easy to grow, and the most popular are parsley, sage, thyme, and oregano. And rosemary. These are the ones that seem to be the most popular and easy to grow. When whether you're planting or whether you're planting in pots or whether you're planting outside, as Michelle has stated, it's really a great idea to make sure that they're close by because you're going to use them more frequently. And you can experiment more with them when they're nearby. as part of your selection, it's really good to know whether they are an annual, which they will grow 1 year and they will die off, and their seeds will the seeds will overwinter and then they'll regrow from seeds the next season if you don't do anything to the plants at all. Or whether it's a perennial. And perennials, they grow every year from the growth of the original plant. And a biennial is something that will grow for 2 years only, and then it tends to die and not be so good. Or if it's an invasive herb, so some of the examples of an annual are basil, cilantro, dill, and mandarin. Perennials are mint, thyme, tarragon, oregano, chives, and sage. And biennial is parsley, and one that is stated here, which is invasive, is mint, and that gets treated just a little differently when you plant it. It needs to be contained in a container, whether it's in the ground or in a pot on your deck or kitchen. And with that, I will turn it over to Erica, who will now talk about harvesting fresh herbs.
I just want, can I just say one thing about perennials too? I think all of us here have overwintered some of our perennials. So annuals, have you had much success overwintering many annuals?
No. I have not.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't either. They typically by the end of the season, you've got.
One annual that's an annual, and the thing about annuals too, sometimes it depends on where they're grown. So for example, one annual for here that's really stated for here in upstate New York is rosemary. But if you go to California, there's rosemary hedges they use everywhere. So it just, a lot of times it will depend on your type of climate that you're in, whether it's an annual or perennial. So for example, a perennial, the rosemary, which they say is an annual here, I've been trying to overwinter it myself and bring it inside and work with it. And it's working so far. So those are the types of things that we talk about experimenting. So you may want to experiment with some of these that may be annuals. But cilantro and dill for sure are annuals and they die and that sort of thing. Maybe you can speak to basil more, Michelle, because
I've had success holding basil indoors for several months, but then eventually it gets very leggy and it doesn't produce much anymore. Right now I have sage in the house and rosemary, and I'm trying to keep those over the winter. And we'll talk a little bit more about what type of conditions they need. But some of these we've been experimenting with of bringing them indoors and seeing if we can carry them over through the winter.
Okay. Harvesting fresh herbs. We're going to the next slide. So let's assume that you've planted these herbs and you now are in a position where you have leafy herbs or you have rosemary that's a little bit more woody. How do you harvest that? One of the things that is really helpful is to harvest them dry after the morning dew. Mornings are usually better. That's when their flavor is a little bit more robust. And you'll treat them a little differently than each other's. You'll need a sharp kitchen knife or a pruning knife or something really sharp and clean. Make sure it's clean. They suggest that you wipe them off with an alcohol wipe, just to be sure you're not providing the plant with any kind of bacteria or fungus or whatever. And what you're going to do with the annuals, first of all, and you also don't want to harvest when there's flowers. So you have to do it before the flowering because they tend to lose some of their flavor once they're flowering, the leaves themselves. So for the annuals, you're going to remove the top leaves and the stems with a knife. You cut just above a leaf or a pair of leaves, just where it splits. And you need to leave like 4 to 6 inches of the plant material on the annual herbs so that they can continue to grow. If you take too much off, you've lost it. I've done that, so you don't want to do that. With perennials, you remove only the top third of the plant or the leafy tip. And with the perennials, like with rosemary, you actually go down to almost near the bottom and take them intermittently so that you're not taking up, you're not giving them a bowl haircut. You don't want to do that. So you treat that a little bit differently. And then once you harvest them with something like basil, you want to treat them when you cut that off, you want to put it in some water and you can leave it on your counter like you do fresh flowers. You see them often in the grocery store that way, but most of the other ones you're going to put in your refrigerator and they'll last for a couple of days in the refrigerator. And you want to add anything to that?
I keep basil. I have kept basil after I've cut it in a container with water
Mhm.
and then a plastic bag over it.
Oh, that's an idea.
And then it'll keep in a refrigerator. The basil really hates the cold.
Right.
So by keeping it in a plastic bag in the refrigerator, it will extend it. You can
It'll
keep
last
it.
longer.
It'll last a little bit longer, but it has to be covered. Otherwise, the cold will turn the leaves brown.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to anything you want to add to that? Any of that?
No, I think that's good.
Some culinary uses. You probably all use herbs for different kinds of dishes. We all really enjoy, three of us like experimenting with recipes and things like that, and we'll share some recipes a little bit later. You can use them in salads, desserts, soups, stews, beverages. You can make beverages with them. There's so many options. Add it toward the end of the cooking for the punch of flavor, so it doesn't get lost in there. And the fresher the herbs, the better the flavor is going to be. Use different kinds of herbs, and we'll go through that. And remember, a tablespoon of fresh herbs equals a teaspoon of the dried herbs. Things like sage, you can use for stuffing, make brown butter, put it on pasta. One of the things I like to do is use, there is such a thing as a hot and spicy oregano. There's a number of different kinds of oregano, but my preference is the hot and spicy. It has a little kick on the end, and I put it on pizza. Even if you order a pizza out, you can throw it in there. And in soups, it really makes a difference in the flavor. And we'll talk a little bit more about recipes later on.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we get to, if you want to start growing herbs, what supplies do you need? How to go about knowing where to put them, how much to water them. So I'm going to give you here what I call rules of thumb, and they're just tips to hopefully give you the most optimal outcome in planting and growing your herbs. So you don't need a lot of supplies. We're going to talk here about container gardens, but a lot of these same principles apply if you're planting your herbs in the ground as well. So I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail. Just keep in mind that herbs need good drainage. So you need to have a pot that allows for drainage. We'll talk about soil. You need soil that allows for drainage. We'll talk about sun exposure and watering needs. Most important thing is to start with a healthy plant. So when you go, we all would probably recommend going to a garden center where there are folks knowledgeable about plants and the plants are well cared for. So start with healthy plants. Look for, that there's no dead leaves or wilting, and that the plant looks healthy and robust and green, and start with a nice healthy plant. Most of us use container gardening. I know Sue has a lot of her herbs in a garden in the ground. I use planters and containers.
I have planters and I also put them in the ground, yeah, amongst the flowers because they help to deter the critters.
So that's a good point. Herbs can be planted alongside flowers in the garden. They can be planted. I've had container gardens with herbs with vegetables like Swiss chard. I grew basil and Swiss chard together. So the only consideration there is that the plants have the same requirements when it comes to water and sunlight. So when you're looking at containers, there are really any type of container you will work, provided that there are drainage holes and that there's sufficient drainage at the bottom of the container. Clay pots are a little more stable, and they allow for air movement through the root zone, and they may require watering more frequently though, because they can tend to dry out. Plastic containers are useful. They're lighter and easier to move around. So if you have a container garden where you want to put multiple plants in one container, then a plastic might be more useful because it's lighter and you can move those around easier. Hanging baskets and window boxes work okay as well. You might need to check on you may need to check on the watering of those because they can tend to dry out faster as well. If you are going to plant several herbs together, rule of thumb here is plant herbs together that have similar watering needs. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to watering, but some herbs like a moist environment and some herbs prefer to dry out a little bit. So if you're going to put them together in one pot, you want to be sure that they have similar watering needs. And these recommendations here, Sue put these recommendations up. I'm just going to move that. These are recommended pot sizes for herbs. So one herb requires an 8 to 12 inch pot that is about 8 inches deep. If you are using several plants, 3 to 4 herbs, use a minimum of an 18-inch pot, 8 inches deep. So those would be a good guide in terms of selecting the pot size that you're going to use. You want to add anything to that?
Just that when you buy your herbs, they are small. So when as you can see in these pictures, they grow and they get big, and therefore that's why the pot size needs to be a little bigger. When you first plant them, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is like way too big of a pot. But in the end, no, it won't be, because they need some room to grow.
So that would be the recommendation for pot sizes. Soil, the best recommendation here is to get a well-drained organic potting mix. You can combine your own potting mix with a peat moss and perlite in equal parts. It has to be a kind of loose soil, again, to allow for drainage. You can see that next quote there. Plants are like people. They don't like their feet in water all the time. So this picture I put in here is a product I purchased at a local gardening store, and you'll see on the label that it is recommended for vegetables and herbs. So this was an organic potting soil that controls moisture. It is ideally suited for planting herbs. So you could talk to the folks at your local gardening store and just say you're looking for potting soil that is suitable for herbs. The watering, my recommendation, another rule of thumb is keep all the tags when you purchase your plants. Either keep them with your plants, ideally, but that is going to tell you what your individual watering needs are. And again, the watering needs vary. So some of your woodier herbs like thyme and rosemary and oregano can tolerate getting and actually don't mind getting a little bit dry. But herbs like cilantro and basil and parsley really prefer to be moist. So again, you would want, you have different watering needs for those different herbs. The tags will tell you how regularly to water them. We all use what we call a finger test to determine water needs. And that is just looking at the top layer of soil by sticking your finger in there. And what would you say, like to your first knuckle or
Yeah.
so? And if it feels dry, then you can go ahead and figure and water. If it's moist, then the plant is probably sufficiently watered. I mentioned that the clay pots may require more frequent watering. That's because they just don't hold the moisture as well. And so, you know, if it's really hot in the summer, you may have to check them. Sometimes I water in the morning and then later on in the day if they get really dry. Be sure to water before the plant wilts. That stresses the plant by, yeah.
I
Did
just
you-
wanted to add, with watering, and I'm sure many of you do this with your other plants, if you have them in the house, a little misting is probably very helpful. But when you're outside watering them, it's really best to get the water onto the dirt, into the soil. I know in a lot of garden centers they spray the water, but when your herbs are really growing and there's a lot of leaf, it doesn't always get into the dirt. So you just need to be sure that it gets to the dirt.
Right, and I'll just add one more thing to add on to that. She mentioned misting sprays, which can be really useful. Like right now, while I have some herbs indoors, they get very dry, so I mist them. I've also tried and have read that putting the pot on a tray with some pebbles, the water that goes through the plant in through the pot into the pebbles will help create some humidity around the plant. Herbs do like a humid environment, but they also need air circulation. So you don't want to overwater them, but many of them like to be in a moist, you know, be watered regularly or stay in a moist environment. Light. Herbs really flourish in sunlight. Many of them come from climates where there's quite a bit of sunlight, not so much here. So growing them indoors in the winter is a challenge when it comes to sunlight. If you're planting outdoors or you're putting your containers outdoors, find a sunny spot, at least 6 hours a day of sunlight. Some herbs will tolerate some partial shade. I think Sue has some growing in some areas that have some shade, like oregano, thyme, mint,
Parsley,
parsley.
yeah,
But most,
but not basil. It needs sun.
yeah, most herbs are gonna really like a full sun at least 6 hours a day. If you have some indoors, like right now, I try to put them at a south facing south. If you are taking perennial herbs indoors over the winter, you may have to have some supplemental lighting, a grow light of some type, because we just have such short days and cloudy days. So they may not be getting as much sunlight as they would like.
One thing I've experimented with is that I took a snipping of rosemary and I planted it in a pot, and I had it lower than in my south window, but lower on the table. And it was not doing much. And then I raised it up so that it could really be level with the windowsill and it's flourishing. So that's just even that little 5 inches from down on the table up to the windowsill height is making a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I put that last bullet on there that one of the advantages to having your herbs in a container is that you can move them around. So if you're putting them outdoors, if you're finding that the spot isn't sunny enough, like Erica was or Sue was saying, sometimes just moving them a little bit can give them that much more sun. So that's an advantage to having the containers.
And if you have heavier pots where you have a number of herbs in one pot, and it's a little pricey, but garden places generally, and I think any of the stores like Lowe's or Home Depot, they probably have them as well. They're trays on casters, so you can put a bunch on there and just move them around. Makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, there's like they're
Yeah.
plant trays with casters. Yeah. So that's I have found that when I try to overwinter them, this is probably a big factor is how much light they're getting. And then if you plant some indoors and then want to transition them to the outdoors, you can acclimate them by putting them in partial shade.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then slowly exposing them to more and more sunlight because you may want to start indoors and then move them outdoors.
You don't want to burn them.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Sue.
So how to build your own container. Now that we have all the general things that we need to put a container together, this is how you do it. First, you gather all your materials that you need. So you're going to choose the healthy plant that Michelle was saying, or two, and make sure that you have the right pot for it. The 8 to 10 inch or 12 inch for one, and up to 18 for a 3 to 4. And making sure that the pot is well drained. And then you're going to have your potting soil. And scissors are on the table in this picture also, and a watering can. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your plant, your herb that you're planting, you're going to take it out of its original pot, and you're going to keep that tag as Michelle has mentioned. And you are going to trim off anything that you see that's dead or yellow. And the most important thing about preparing your herb for potting is to loosen up the roots at the bottom. And you can do that by kind of with the scissors a little bit. You can snip a little bit, or I just use my fingers and just really kind of separate the soil and the roots at the bottom so that they have a good start when you're potting. And then what you would do is you would fill your pot with about a third of the way up with the potting soil, the organic potting soil that you purchased. And then you'd place your herb in the pot, and the rule of thumb is that the top of the herb should be about the same at the same level as the top of the pot. And then what you want to do is you would just fill in with some more soil, organic soil, and you want to just like tap it a little bit. You don't want to push down with your fingers to like push it into the herb into the pot. It needs loose soil, it needs air to grow. So you just want to fill in to make sure that you have all the dirt around the herb. And then you just water and watch it grow. And as Michelle was saying, to know when to water, you just put your finger in there up to the first knuckle. If it's dry, then you just put some water in it. And then you just put it in a sunny place and enjoy watching it grow and then using it for your culinary experiences. And with that, we have some ideas of recipes and companions for herbs that you may grow. And I'll just do the first couple and
Go
you
ahead.
guys
Yep,
can
go ahead.
that can chime in. So for rosemary, I think, and we do have a recipe for this, but one of the most useful things that, or the rosemary is used the most is in roasting vegetables and especially potatoes. I mean, I know I probably have this at least once a week. You put the potatoes in the oven with some olive oil and rosemary, salt, and pepper, and it's magic. But it's also really great in bread, on pork, and it's in sauces. So it's rosemary is definitely a very an herb that is used quite frequently.
It's got a strong flavor, so if you're not sure about how much to use, you start out light and then you can always add more because it's pretty strong, especially freshly cut rosemary.
And just in general, again, with these herbs and putting it into your cooking, for dried herbs, you want to put them, and Michelle's the one that told me this. You want to put them in the beginning of your cooking because they're dry, they need to absorb water to become fresh. But with fresh herbs, you want to put them at the end of your cooking because they will keep more of the flavor at the end. Sage, I use a lot. I use rub sage quite a bit on poultry. That's one of my major poultry things, and also on pork. But again, it's also used in stuffing and vegetables and sage butter too. I mean, making butter out of these herbs is really a wonderful thing too.
You can make compound butters. I've made butter, just simply softening butter to room temperature, blending it and blending it with whatever herbs I had in my garden, sometimes parsley and a dill, and it makes it, they're wonderful for putting on fish or putting on meats or even spreading on bread, and they'll keep in the refrigerator. You just mix them all up with a mixer with softened butter and throw your herbs in there, a little salt and pepper or just some pepper, and you get a compound butter, which is great on vegetables and fish and chicken, a lot of things.
And then oregano on pizza sauce and tomato sauce, soups, pasta, salads. It's used for a lot of different things.
I use a lot of oregano and thyme and basil, and one of the things I've been doing is making a lot of soups this winter, like a lot of people do. But I like to vary the flavor of them. So when I do chicken noodle soup, I don't do it that way. I add potato, I add oregano, I add basil and thyme, and it gives it kind of a Mediterranean-y flavor because of the mixture of those kinds of herbs. And I also use rosemary for their little shortbread savory, like a snack, kind of with a cocktail or something like that. I think we have a recipe for that
I put
in the link as
recipes in
well.
there. Mhm.
And then you can use things like lemongrass or lemon verbena for cookies. There's a lot of different things you can do with the herbs. Shouldn't be afraid to experiment with it because they're really fun to use.
Another, I put on here basil beverages, water, flavored waters, especially in the summer or even in the winter. If you like water that has a little bit of flavor to it, you can put basil and fruits into water and let it just put in the refrigerator. We've done mint water for our class in May. We did mint and oranges and just let them sliced oranges and put that in water and put it in the refrigerator overnight, and it makes a really refreshing drink and simple. It's easy. It's easy. So I'll just see, there's dips and dressings are another way to just utilize some fresh herbs. Sue mentioned a lot of these herbs like basil, chives, dill, cilantro are great to finish a dish with. They do sometimes not always stand up real well to cooking, but to sprinkle on at the end of cooking or as a garnish is a great way to use those. And I'll put here, we did put, so these are just a sampling of recipes that we thought would inspire you, give you a few ideas. These are the garlic smashed potatoes that you make, right?
Right.
So Sue mentioned that potatoes are a great complement, or rosemary is a great complement to potatoes. And
I use the small ones. The little round ones are come in different packages and whatever. But I use those. I actually parboil them. And then put them in a big bowl and put the rosemary and salt and pepper and olive oil and mix it all together, put it on a cookie sheet with foil so I don't have a mess. And then I roast those. And I start with a lower temperature and then I raise it so that they get kind of brown and crunchy and they're wonderful. And then put a little Parmesan cheese on them. It's very nice.
And these were some other ideas, uses, biscuits, baking. This recipe we found is herb loaded chicken noodle soup. So again, I think Erica mentioned, don't be afraid to just try experimenting with some herbs in some of your more traditional recipes, like a chicken noodle soup, and see if it should add a lot more flavor to it and make it, a little more interesting.
There are a lot of cookie recipes out there. If you ask the Google, who knows everything, you can Google a specific herb like lemon citrus, or not citrus, I'm sorry, lemon verbena. And then citrus herb has mint, and some of them have an interesting combination of herbs that you use in these cookies, and it just changes the flavor a little bit. It's really very nice.
Okay, I think we're about at 8:15. We have one last slide in here on with a link to resources, gardening resources that have a whole section on vegetable and herb gardening. So we included that in there as well. All right, I think we're at 8:15. So Sarah, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, that would be fine if you stop sharing. We do have a couple questions that have come in. I'm just going to start from the top. Some people were really great at contributing some stories. So if you hadn't had a chance to, review the chat, the icon is on the menu bar, typically at the bottom of your screen if you want to read along to what I was responding to. But early on in the presentation, and I did give a short typed reply, but what does overwintering mean?
Oh,
So overwintering is when you bring, there's two ways that overwintering happens. One with perennials, if they're in the ground already, what I do is I just put like some leaves over the top or something to kind of, or maybe a little mulch, and it will keep them warm enough. I mean, especially we'll have to see with the weather that we're getting next week, but to see if they come back in the spring. But for most of the time they do. And then for any other ones, like my rosemary, for example, I brought it inside, and as Michelle said, she has some sage inside, or I put it in like a garage, my garage, put it in a south facing window, and it's like about 50 degrees, it's like heated, or you can put it in your basement with like a grow light. And then you would just keep it over the winter. And then you would just bring it outside in the spring. And that is pretty much whatever.
And it tends to be those perennials that are hardier. That's what we were saying, like you can't really, basil will die out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
I brought it in one year and I think I was
Yeah.
able to keep it a little bit through September and then it just didn't make it.
I'm also experimenting right now with rosemary outside, out of the wind and close to the house on the east side of my house.